See everybody tonight. Thanks for showing up for the Tuesday night weekly practice group. I wanted to continue talking about equanimity, but I'll save some time at the end to hear from folks. It's always good to hear the questions, but also your reflections, what you've been learning, your own understanding, own experience of equanimity, this balance, stability, unflappable, unshakable quality of presence, no matter the conditions or qualities that are showing up internally, externally. This is Sayadaw U Tejaniya, this Burmese teacher, Buddhist monk. He says, we need to be aware of where our attention is and not get caught in focusing on or putting too much energy on any particular object. Spread your attention so you are seeing the full picture, both inside and out, emotionally and physically. When we practice in this way, it's called vipassana, seeing what is and letting it be. And I think this point has a lot to do with the experience of equanimity. There's something about, and we should just reflect, even as I'm talking, there's something about sensing the great breadth and depth of this moment right here. It's really helpful sometimes to tune into a particular object of our experience, to get really sensitive. But generally speaking, we don't want to lose the great depth and breadth, the context, perspective of here and now. And you'll just sense directly in your own mind, in your own heart, that the quality of acceptance, the quality of understanding, the quality of balance, the quality of non-reactivity, all of that increases naturally the more vast, the more inclusive, the more wide open the heart is. You could just see it. And in this opposite way, when our mind is more narrowly focused, then there can be more reactivity. Like the mind and the concentration in the mind is really dependent on that one thing. Sometimes equanimity is called a quiet confidence, right? And the heart is confident both in the specifics, the refined attention to this and that that's coming, whatever it is that's coming and going, but maybe even more so, the quiet confidence is in the vastness. And in that vastness, when we're attuned to the vastness, what it means is that everything, every idea that the mind generates about what's happening and about who I am or what this is, will be then in the context of that vastness. It kind of puts everything in its place, in perspective. I think I read last Tuesday, if you were here, that passage, very famous passage, where the Buddha says to his son Rahula, who I think at the time was a novice monk, a young boy, but who had been living with the monks for a couple of years at that point, or a year or so at that point. And the Buddha gave him some teachings, and one piece of that was develop meditation, Rahula, that is like the earth. Agreeable and disagreeable sensory impressions will not take charge of your mind when you develop meditation like the earth. Isn't that a beautiful invitation? I mean, it's a little bit like as I understand koans, just to contemplate being like the earth, the heart, the mind, as wide as the earth. And the more our heart includes everything, every possibility. I sometimes tell people, when they're asking or interested in, like, well, what are the fruits of practice, or how do you know that the practice is deepening and settling in a good way? I mean, there are different ways to reflect on this, of course, but one way is just the sense that the heart, the mind, is less often surprised. And it's not the same as not experiencing awe or the sense of wonder, of being enlivened and seeing the humor in things. But in a way, uh, because the mind isn't fixed on something specific, something particular, and it's more and more in an open state, then in that open state, the very nature of that openness is not being fixed on any particular thing. And in not being fixed on any particular thing, whatever arises doesn't appear to be surprising, or doesn't appear to be, well, this shouldn't happen, because the mind wasn't fixed on an idea of what should happen. So when something arises, whether it's a thought, a memory, or a sound, or a sight, or a sensation, or whatever kind of phenomena it is, it's not surprising. Oh, yeah, sometimes it is like this. And you can just, when you have different events in your life and you just have that wise attitude, like, oh, this would be interesting, this would be good practice, this conversation I'm going to have, or doing this thing over here, or doing this other thing over there. Just let's see if the heart can realize or rest in that unflappable, unshakable balance. So if it turns out to be a lot harder, or more unpleasant, or more pleasant than we expected, less success, more success, whatever it is, it's like, oh yeah, sometimes it's like this. We have the thought, I'm not getting anywhere in my practice. Oh yeah, sometimes it's like this. Or we have the thought or the sense that the practice is really deepening in a beautiful way. Oh yeah, sometimes it's like this. It's a beautiful image. We have to, probably most of us at least have to transform any attitude we might already have, as a habit established in the mind, basically being afraid of balance, like that we're going to lose uh, something enlivening or something like that. Will become flat and even and boring, and it will be, we'll just be dry and brittle, and because we'll lose the spark, we'll lose the dynamic aspect of life. And so each of us, we have to find that more radiant, more enlivened quality of equanimity. It's really, the experience is really the opposite of being dead or being flat, right? Because real balance, real equanimity means that the heart is fearless enough, trusting enough to let everything be breathtakingly the way it is, alive, alive with uncertainty, alive with change, alive with the inclusive dynamic of all causes and conditions, nature being nature, ungovernable, unreliable, wild, but not in a bad way, in the way that nature is. It's neither good nor bad. It's just how it is. It's like sometimes we have that sense, like especially with big weather, and especially when we're experiencing big weather, but we're in a more open place, like a field, or where we have a real sense of all that's moving, the wind and the clouds and even the quality of the air and how the animals are responding to the shift in weather. And it can get really, the heart can get really awake about the immensity and the wildness and the uncertainty and the power of what's unfolding. And to see the sort of paradoxical experience of like how wild life is, nature is, the moment is, and how settled and balanced the mind that is open can be. Anything can happen anytime, as our teachers tell us. And at any moment, our mind, because of the force of habit, it could tune into one aspect of the present moment and find a way to scare ourselves or to trigger greed in the mind. Like, if only this, then I'd feel good, I'd feel better. It's like taking the bait. But we don't have to take the bait. We can just let, equanimity, that beautiful balance. It's really letting nature be nature, letting everything be, including like equanimity with the wildness of our mind or the wildness of our, um, emotional life or even, bodily energies. Because sometimes, I'm sure you've noticed, the energy of the body, the energy of the mind is all over the place. And we can have equanimity with that, as opposed to needing to having, like, if we have the idea of equanimity, this, I think I maybe talked about this last week, this point that I remember Michelle McDonald making about long retreats being a great place to learn how heavy, how unworkable and unnecessary false equanimity is. Just the pretend equanimity, like, I know I'm a Buddhist, so I should be equanimous. And then we go about trying to look like we have equanimity. But really, equanimity is that capacity we have, or we can develop, to let nature be nature, the nature of the mind, the nature of the energy body, the nature of our world, to let it be. And it really brings up the tenderness. The Buddha talks about it as one of the blessings supreme. There's a beautiful sutta discourse. If you haven't come across it, it's very well known because in a lot of early Buddhist circles, it's chanted quite regularly. The Mangala Sutta, I'm sorry, Maha Mangala Sutta, discourse on the highest blessings. And one section of that is a mind unshaken when touched by worldly states, sorrowless, stainless, and secure. This is the blessing supreme. And in that sutta, the Buddha just names all these different blessings, which is itself a blessing, just to cause our heart to acknowledge that as messy and broken as this world is, as real as the suffering is, this is a world that also comes with some real blessings. And to just name them, to see, so that we see them better. A mind unshaken when touched by worldly states, sorrowless, stainless, and secure. This is a blessing supreme. And this is another sutta, the Bara Sutta. The five heaps, right? So the five heaps are one of the ways the Buddha talks about the body and mind. Usually it's translated as the five aggregates. You might have heard that. So there's form, and then the other four heaps, aggregates, or the four aspects of the mind: feeling, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. So the five heaps are heavy loads, the Buddha says. The untrained, the untrained person foolishly shoulders them. Carrying such weights is suffering in the world. Tossing away these burdens is bliss. The wise have discarded all the weight without picking up any new troubles, having torn out craving by the roots, and are free of desire, thoroughly quenched. So, how do we toss out, right? As the Buddha says here, tossing out these burdens is bliss. Right? We can't get rid of body, feeling, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. So we're really tossing out the wrong way of relating or the wrong way of attaching or identifying with these different aspects of the body and mind, these different aspects of the way it is. So, in a way, we might wrongly think of equanimity as being invulnerable, but it might be more useful to think of equanimity as making peace with vulnerability, making peace with vulnerability to the nth degree, being so wide open, right? That whatever might trigger resistance or greed, lust, or any kind of shutting down, we've made peace with all of that. So all that's left is equanimity. The heart is so present, so exposed, so vulnerable. Having seen it over and over again, the wildness of the present moment, it finds stability in the total exposure, not in getting in a very, very safe place. You know how it is. The more we get in a safe place, we move into a gated community. We get a really big car that even if it's in a terrible accident, it's going to be invulnerable. And we give to all our close people in our lives so much more than they give us. So they're in debt to us, so they're not gonna, it's all these crazy ways that we try to find security. We take all the right supplements to protect our health. But the more we do that, the more we invest our security in things that are fundamentally not secure, not reliable, the more vulnerable we feel. And the more we cultivate a relationship with everything that scares us, everything that's uncertain, everything that's disturbing, basically everything we don't want to feel and see, the more secure we feel. A great irony. Yeah, and so this is part of that, how I sense, equanimity is related to this insight into vastness, this insight into inclusivity. Here's another way that for me has been helpful. I don't know, I'm hoping that some of you have read the wonderful book written by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Um, she has a couple of things. I read her book on mosses that was rewritten, I think, from her dissertation. She's a botanist, besides being deeply wise in terms of indigenous teaching. She's part of one of the native nations from the East Coast, the Potawatomi people, I think. I forget if that's her group, um, but the book I'm thinking of now is Braiding Sweetgrass, and it's really her blending of her study of indigenous wisdom with her formal Western study of botany. And yeah, so it's called Braiding Sweetgrass. And this section I'm going to read is about the lichen, these ancient fungi, maybe. I forget if they're not plants, I know, but you know what I mean by lichen, right? They grow on rocks. The lichen in a single body unites the two great pathways of life, the so-called grazing food chain based on the building up of beings, and the food chain based on taking them apart, producers and decomposers, the light and the darkness, the givers and receivers, wrapped in each other's arms, the warp and the weft of the same blanket, so closely woven that it is impossible to discern the giving from the taking. Some of Earth's oldest beings, lichen, are born from reciprocity. And then a little later in the next paragraph, she writes, these ancients carry teachings in the way that they live. They remind us of the enduring power that arises from mutualism, from the sharing of gifts carried by each species. Balanced reciprocity has enabled them to flourish under the most stressful of conditions. Their success is measured not by consumption and growth, but by graceful longevity and simplicity, by persistence while the world changes around them. So I don't know if this makes sense to you, but I think what was moving about that for me, and especially in light of the Buddhist teachings on equanimity, there's something about realizing our life as a lichen, that like what we're opening to in our spiritual practice is the natural, unavoidable reciprocity of all things. Because that's what makes everything even. In any little way, we pick sides, good and bad, good and evil. Well, then we're it's setting our heart up for disturbance, right? Taking a side means we have something to defend. But when we sense open to the mutualism, the reciprocity, how it's all working together, right? It's not an idea, it's not a philosophy, it's something we can sense when the mind is settled. And we're able, in that settledness, the mind isn't drawn under the vortex of how we generally think about things, which is in terms of dualism, good and bad, right? It can, in a sense, step outside of that habit of projecting dualistic ideas and sense the wholeness, the mutualism, the reciprocity of what this is, right? Like we can understand it intellectually, that nature, there really isn't good and bad. Tornadoes aren't bad from a particular perspective. Like if you're a vulnerable human being and it's coming towards you, or if you own or care about something and the tornado is moving toward it, well then, in that context, you might say it's terrible, it's bad, it's evil. But from a wider, deeper, more inclusive perspective, right, it doesn't make sense. It's neither good nor bad. It is what it is. So equanimity it doesn't involve any kind of stance or belief. It's more the natural emotional tone, or you could say affective tone in the heart when everything's included. The subtle, the gross, the vast, the simple. When everything's included, when the heart is truly open and unfixed in any place, not attached in any way, then the emotional tone of that openness is what we call equanimity. And like I think I mentioned last week, I always love the fact that in Buddhism, equanimity is considered a quality of love. Like that recognition is a kind of love. Oh, it's always interesting, like when you hear what I've just said, it can sound maybe some of the time to some people like I'm being dismissive of the relative truth, and I don't mean to be dismissive by using the word relative truth, that individuals and groups of people and other beings, like a lot of the animals on the planet, are being terribly, terribly abused and harmed. And this just happens, all the time in ways that if we let it, will break our heart wide open. So that's just an interesting thing for us to reflect on, how the relative reality of power, beings with power doing what beings with power tend to do, which is they do what they can do with the power that they have, often regardless of what harm it causes to those with less power. And that's part of this human animal realm that, is sort of dominant on this planet, is this, it's kind of a power place. And so this is exactly the kind of place to explore, like, does equanimity have any value, any spiritual significance for us, right? It's exactly in a place that is about power and power doing what power does, because it makes equanimity real. If we were in some very refined angelic realm, celestial realm, with bodies of pure light, not needing to poop or eat, you know, we feed on the love that goes around. That's all we need for nutriment. Some of That's how they describe some of the more refined realms in Buddhist cosmology. Well, equanimity would be sort of we would imagine we have equanimity because nothing really is disturbing in our internal and external environments. So yeah, I'm pretty balanced, happy-go-lucky. But in this world, the way it is, it's a really interesting exploration. I forget if I mentioned this last week, but it's had such a profound effect. I mean, really, even to our lives right now, but way back 300 BCE, around that time at least, 300 years after the time the Buddha was alive, um, there was a fierce king in northern India, Ashoka, King Ashoka, and he was like so many of these monarchs, all about conquering more land, having more wealth, having more power, bigger armies, so on. And so there was one, I mean, as the story goes, and of course, for a long, long time, especially as the Western world connected with India, heard these stories, everyone presumed they were sort of mythical, not really referring back to person. But then um, with some digs that happened in India um, in the late 1800s and 1900s, early 1900s, they started to unearth these big pillars that Ashoka ordered to be built. And he had all these sort of wise and beautiful values printed or put into these pillars that would be in cities and towns during in the kind of country that he ruled. And they were beautiful, about not just around non-harming, for example, including not harming animals and many other sort of tenets or values that you find in the Buddhist teachings. And the Buddhism that we know is directly descended because he sent his daughter, who was a Buddhist nun, a very wise person, to Sri Lanka and really helped establish uh, early Buddhism, the early Buddhist teachings in Sri Lanka, which then supported over the centuries, keeping these early Buddhist teachings alive, places like Thailand and Burma and other places as well. One of the things about Sri Lanka being an island is that there's been some stability in terms of mostly the nuns and monks keeping the teachings alive as opposed to the lay people. So anyway, how did Ashoka, who was, just a typical monarch, bent on more land, more power, so on and so on, what converted him to become a sincere student of the Buddhist teachings and practices? Well, after a particularly terrible battle, so much destruction and death, um, he noticed a serene monk, as the story goes, at least walking through the battlefield, going from one place to another. Um, and couldn't understand somebody who apparently, in observation, seems so um, unmoved or not disturbed by what humans do to each other. So he asked that person to, got somebody to go get him, the monk, and asked him, like, what's going on? What do you do? And the monk explained, his practice and the Buddhist teachings. And at some point, King Ashoka became a devout student. So that, that's an example of the power of equanimity. And we all have our own, minor version of that. Like we're in a particularly contentious meeting where everybody's losing their shit. But there's one person who somehow is able to remain balanced and not get caught with this side or that side. Not that they don't have an opinion, even, but just holding the whole space. I mean, that's the sort of felt sense of these people who have that equanimity, that kind of ground, being like the earth. And it's so beneficial because they can keep something alive in the midst of chaos, in the midst of hate, in the midst of so much agitation and blame and judgment. So we want to think of equanimity as a powerful intervention in the world that we live in, not as some retreat from the world, because that's often, we'll associate someone who goes away from the world, but it's really a powerful gift all around. And it just arises from that vastness. Here's another version of that, the vastness of that wisdom. This comes from Shantideva, a 9th century Buddhist monk. He wrote the very famous text, Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life. And this particular passage goes like this. Hence, everything is governed by other factors, which in turn are governed by others. And in this way, nothing governs itself. Having understood this, I should not become angry with phenomena that are like apparitions. Right, so that's just another, in my mind at least, another way of talking about mutualism, or what we would normally call causes and conditions, that things are lawful, but the lawfulness doesn't refer back to any one. It's just the play, the movement, the lawful movement of causes and conditions. And when we see that, as he says in this passage, it's not easy to maintain our anger or our fear, or somehow I'm going to escape and find a safe spot. Another Western version of this, if from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. I'm sure many of you have heard this quote. It's quite famous. If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each person's sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. But we tend to we've cultivated just through our habits and the way culture has conditioned our mind, we've learned to really like the drama of reactivity. And we're suspicious of the coolness of balance, of equanimity. So we don't want to convince ourselves to be equanimous, but we want to explore it. And we want to see directly, we have to somehow learn, see directly that more equanimity, it's exactly equanimity that allows us to be real, allows us to be exposed, allows us to be intimate with our lives. And then to be able more and more to respond from that place of being connected and vulnerable and tender. Without equanimity, we will be holding things at a distance because we have to deal, we have to respect our fear. Equanimity is really the opposite of fear. And it's summed up in, I might have mentioned this last week, but Padmasambhava, who is a famous um, Buddhist leader who helped to bring Buddhism up into Tibet. And he had a very famous line, although my view is as vast as the sky, my attention to karma. And in particular, I think karma, um, it's really about cause and effect. But like what's skillful and unskillful is also would be a correct way to understand my attention to karma, my attention to what's skillful and unskillful is as fine as a grain of barley flour. So very precise, very refined attention, really caring about what causes harm, what's for my own well-being and the well-being of others, or what's for causing myself or causing others harm. Like my attention to that is as refined as a grain of barley flour. I'm really attentive, I really care. And my mind at the same time is as vast as the sky. Yeah, we want to sense this potential we have to really live in the world we live in, as it actually is, nothing idealistic, not projecting anything on, right? There's one of the similes that Shanti Deva, this 9th century Buddhist monk, uses in another passage that's been passed down over the centuries. It's just a great simile about, either we can cover the earth in leather so we don't step on anything sharp, pointy, like a sharp rock, or we can build ourselves a pair of moccasins, cover our feet with leather. What's the wise thing to do? Because what we tend to do because of the wildness and uncertainty and the pleasures, uh, sorrows and pleasures of life, what we tend to do is want to even out the world, move to the suburbs. Not that the suburbs are necessarily pleasant, but that's the stereotype. Go get some nice situation, money in the bank, beautiful partner, white picket fence or whatever that image might look like for each of us. Of course, it will be different. Um, but the teachings on equanimity and just generally about deepening wisdom is that, well, how can the heart be transformed in a way that makes the world the way it is not a problem for anybody? So that when the world for us isn't a problem, then what's left is compassionate action, right? Because what would be in the way of responding nimbly, creatively, in an enlivened way, in a compassionate way? What would be in the way when we're not needing to get something to be safe or needing to get rid of something to be safe? We're already totally okay with the exposure. The only thing that would be left, the only thing that would move our heart into action would be sensing that other people are not okay with their conditions. And sometimes we're that person not okay with our conditions, and we'd respond to that. Like we're feeling too warm and we take our sweater off, or too cold and we put the sweater on, or anything, right? It would be, as in some of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions, they say, what's left is unstoppable compassionate action, because it's just the natural, it's what's left to animate our lives when we uproot the tendencies for fear and greed, hate. And it's not that we can't react, but it's like the heart knows deeply not to, it doesn't help. If there's something to do, this is again from Shantideva, if there's something to do in any given moment around any particular situation, well, we do it. And if there's nothing particular to do about a particular situation, well, there's nothing to do. But in either case, why get tight about it? If there's something to do, do it. If there's nothing to do, there's nothing to do. But the balance can remain. One of the great Thai forest masters of the last century, Ajahn Suwat, had a simple teaching: mountains are only heavy if you try to lift them. So if there's something to do, we'll do it. But like the world becomes unworkable when we have a fixed view that it shouldn't be this way. We don't have to, like, it's like lifting the mountain, say, no, the world's not supposed to be like this, it should be like this other thing, right? We create this weight in our heart that way, as opposed to in a very nimble moment by moment way. Well, if there's something to do that we sense, the heart senses is for my well-being, the well-being of others, the well-being of both, and we do it. Reflecting, is this for my well-being, the well-being of others, the well-being of both? Why we do it, we reflect. Is this for my well-being, the well-being? Because that's that unstoppable compassionate action. That's what the heart, that's what just naturally will animate our heart. We're, as the Buddha teaches, we're just a natural process, as a human being. This life of mine, we call Mark's life, it doesn't refer back to something. It's just a tumbling forward of causes and conditions, trying to be human. I like that way of thinking. Instead of I'm this deluded, conditioned human being trying to be a Buddha, trying to be free, trying to be nature, it's more, I think, more useful to think, well, here it is, this is nature trying to show up as a human being, Mark, conditioned the way he is in this particular time and place with these particular, life situation, karmic underlying tendencies. Like how amazing that nature can show up like this. And like nature, remember, is just a natural, free unfolding, like water down the side of a mountain. There's no molecule of the water that feels stressed about the movement down the mountainside. Oh, there's a lot of work. Or, God, I got to navigate this rock ahead, or something like that, right? It's just, there's nothing neurotic in that, right? So that's essentially what this is right here for each of us. And yet, this natural flow of nature, of causes and conditions, is, just this particular part of the dance is showing up as a human being with a personality and relationships and tendencies and likes and dislikes. It reminds me of that famous line from one of Rumi's poems. I mean, it's loosely translated into English this way, which is it's not so much drop becoming the ocean, but rather the ocean showing up as a drop, something like that, right? And that's just another way to understand equanimity, right? Is this sort of profound balance of the universe, of the whole of this, all included, right? So the natural balance of the vastness, but showing up in a very particular, in a sense, individual place and time and situation. It's a little wonderful miracle that each of us are in that sense. And that's really helped me get a sense, kind of a beautiful sense of the possibility of equanimity. So I'm going to leave it here so we have a little bit more than 10 minutes to talk. It'd be nice to hear from several of you. Always good to say your name. Feel also free to share your pronouns if you'd like and where you're coming from. But just your own thoughts, reflections, your own learnings, your own deep suspicions about equanimity, like, oh, maybe theoretically it's good, but at this time, not good. I think, it's just good to hear different points of view, including any questions that you might have that are coming up. Just feel free to unmute yourself and begin to speak. And I'm going to keep myself spotlighted for those who are new because we record this right to our YouTube channel, but my screen will be the only screen that's recorded. But the audio does get recorded and will be up on our YouTube channel and on Dharma Seed. So anybody have like to begin the conversation?
Hi.
Hi, Kathy Lynn.
Hi. Um, I was thinking about life, like life includes everything, you know, like these terrible, terrible familial tragedies that are like Shakespearean plays. And I, my mother is maybe moving into the next phase of existence, and I have a family that's pretty much like a Shakespearean tragedy. And, it's like, I'm like, how do I, in my head, I can know that it's all life, every single drop of it, the tragedy, the drama, my unbalance in it. But I'm not, I'm not steady at all in it. Which is kind of why I came on today. I thought I need the refuge of the practice, but it is really hard. And, I'm not going to be able to change patterns and conditions that have been in place for almost all my life. It's probably going to get a lot more amplified before anything changes. So guess I'm glad to be here. And if you have any, I'm grasping at straws. I want some magical practice for it to change, or at least me to change. Anyway, thank you for your wisdom today.
Oh yeah, you're welcome, Kathy Lynn. Can you sense that it's okay for it to be as wild as it is? And like even assuming that in moments, Kathy Lynn, that your response to what's going on, let's just assume in moments it's unskillful. I mean, that's your sense of it. Can you be okay that, like, is there room in your heart to understand that, oh, yeah, sometimes I'm going to be unskillful. Other people in the family will be unskillful, and sometimes I'll be unskillful. Sometimes I'll lose it. I'll act out in ways that will cause harm for me, for others, all around. That's how it is sometimes. So that's the beginning. That forgiveness and tenderness is really the beginning of equanimity. It's like, do we have to reject the limits of our skill? Or do we have to reject ourselves or reject our life because the limits of our skill or the limits of what's going on in the world or the limits of what's going on in our families? Or can it be okay that things are as messy as they are, including ourselves, part of the mess? Could it conceivably be okay that things are really this messy, this broken?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of attachment to what I think it should be or what I want it to be. And I know it is just as it is. And yeah, I'll work with that, like being okay with my unskillfulness, my unsteadiness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing that what your last comment is it is kind of a confusing thing between the what is felt as the rightness of that aspiration, that my response could be wiser and kinder, or they could be clearer and nicer about things. Um, it's appropriate, I think, to have these aspirations, like to sense the possibility how what is messy could be less messy, right? But how to sense these possibilities, these better possibilities without getting attached or without losing connection with the way it is actually. But it's not nice. It's messy now. I aspire, I really makes my heart sing to imagine our family more harmonious and tender with each other. But right now it's like this. Like, because maybe there's room to hold both, like the aspiration, like what might be possible in the family, the kind of healing. Because it is, I think, healthy to stay open, even in really messy, painful situations, that that healing may still be possible. And I want to be really connected with what I'm feeling and seeing and sensing here.
Yeah. That balance, that'd be good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing with us, Kathy Lynn.
Bye.
Who would like to go next? Any deep learnings people wish to share, willing? It's a generous thing. Remember, just your own learnings, even if it's a painful learning. I trust we're all grounded in some thread of equanimity. May it be so. Just mention we have a new program at the center coming up. Richard Bonk, a longtime leader, is going to be leading a mindful nature immersion Saturday the 10th. This, I think, is in person only, so only for those of you in town, 10 to 11:30. Richard's been doing it at um, the University of Minnesota Arboretum for a long time, these nature hikes and nature immersion and doing some writing with it sometimes as well. I don't know if this Saturday he's going to do any writing exercises with nature immersion. But anyway, if you're interested, look on the calendar for May 10th, Saturday, and you'll see the listing for that mindful nature immersion. Shelley's doing a half-day retreat this coming Saturday, and I'll lead the day long at the end of the month. Um, Forgetting when it is. I think it's over Memorial Day weekend, the day-long retreat. Good. So nice to be with everybody tonight.